Hey everyone, it's me, Kat Muir from Cheap and Easy Eats, and today we're going to be discussing the most common problems with making homemade kombucha and how to fix them. Hey everyone, it's me, Kat Muir, and today we're going to be discussing the most common problems with making your own kombucha. Now, a lot of you guys have been asking me, messaging me about different things that have happened. Now, the majority of you have messaged me saying that it's been fantastic, you've saved tons of money, you've been making really tasty brews that you can't usually buy in the shops as well, so that's been excellent. But some of you have also came back to me with some fairly common questions about things that happened, and I had to think back to when it happened to me as well, but there are things that can go wrong when you're making kombucha, so we're going to tackle all of these things today in this video. So the most common things are the kombucha can be too flat, or it can be too fizzy, or it can taste too sweet, or it can taste too sour, or you can have things like the scoby can look mouldy or be mouldy, and you can have things like fly infestation. You can have things where the scoby kind of smells a bit funny, and also you can have things where it doesn't actually change at all. So you can make your tea and put the right amount of sugar and everything, and nothing happens at all. So we're gonna go through all of these different situations, and the first one we're going to talk about is if it's too flat. So while we're talking about that, I'm going to pour myself a nice glass of cherry and ginger kombucha. I mean, I love kombucha, and it's a really great way to start your day. I quite like it in the morning, but also I have it in the evening sometimes if I'm sitting down. And I like to make them, put them in these little bottles, as you know. I like to strain out anything. This is a batch that I've just made, and I actually took it out too early. So it's flat. You can see there's no fizz in it whatsoever, but it's really, really tasty. And some people like it without the fizz. So some people are actually asking me, how can I make it so it isn't fizzy? So it's okay if you make it and it's not fizzy. But normally you'll leave it for about 3 days minimum to do the second fermentation if you want it to have a flavour through it other than just straight kombucha. So with this one, this was only left for 2 days because actually I didn't make them quickly enough because I've been working on quite a lot of other things. So I wanted to have kombucha today, and I poured it out too early, and that's one of the reasons why it's flat. The other reason is if you've left it 3 to 5 days in the second fermentation and it's still a little bit flat, then you can leave the bottles out sealed but in the sunlight, and the sunlight will make it very fizzy very quickly. So you have to be careful you don't leave it in the sunlight for too long, or else it will go too fizzy. So that's sort of common problems that you can get. And if you don't like it flat, then leave it for longer in the double fermentation. And if it's still not fizzy enough for you, then put it in a bottle, leave it in the sunlight for a couple of days, and it'll be super fizzy. If you prefer it more flat, then take it out of the second fermentation 2 to 3 days, put it in a bottle and put it straight in the fridge. If it's coming out and you're moving it from one bottle to the next bottle and it's too fizzy at that stage, just leave the top off the bottle for a little while, give it a little shake, and all the air bubbles will come out, then seal it up and you can put it in the fridge. So that's kind of 2 questions in one. So the other thing that a lot of people have been saying to me about is that sometimes when they've made it, especially when it's the first time they've just started off, that it doesn't really change. So they've did the correct thing, they followed the video exactly, and they put the right amount of sugar in, and they did everything, and then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, it's still sweet, it just still tastes like tea. So sometimes, although I keep mine closed over, it's quite a big lumpy fella, but sometimes you need to open the lid and let the oxygen get in. And I would recommend putting quite a thick tea towel over the top and covering it with a few really strong elastic bands, because you need the elastic bands over because of another problem that we'll talk about that can happen sometimes, not so much in winter, but in the summertime you can get little fruit flies, and they just go nuts for the stuff, and they'll try and get into your bottle and infect your scoby. So you must put a really thick tea towel over the top so that oxygen can get through, and then the carbon dioxide bubbles can escape as well. And that's quite good, because then it'll start to change. If you've got a scoby you've been using for quite a long time, like mine, then you don't really need to leave the top open. You can just leave it sealed all the time, and that'll work perfectly well. So sometimes you can get fly infestation, and it's little fruit flies. They're quite pesky. They go nuts for kombucha. They love vinegar. They love things like that. And with mine, with the jar that I make kombucha in, it has a little tap on the front, and I keep that covered all the time with a bit of cling film. And I keep the top sealed pretty well, either like I was just discussing with a cheesecloth, tea towel, something of that nature, or I keep the jar completely sealed. But if you do unfortunately get some fruit flies in, they will lay eggs in your scoby. So you either have to chuck your whole scoby out, or if it's quite a big, thick, chunky one, you want to take quite a few layers off on either side, and then just cut round the outside, like maybe about 1.5 centimetres, just to make sure you've got rid of anywhere they might have laid eggs. And then keep it completely airtight, so if there is anything in it, it'll kill it. My recommendation would be get rid of it and start again. Now, when you're making kombucha a lot, your scoby will keep layering up. So I would recommend that you have a look at the other video, which we'll put a link for, on how to split a scoby. And when you split your scoby, keep it in another jar, just like we showed you in the video, with some sugary tea, and that's your scoby hotel. So that if it does go mouldy or it gets infected, then you can throw it away and start again. The next one I'm going to talk about is mould. Now, scobies, they're not the prettiest, most attractive looking things in the planet, but if it's mouldy, it'll have this blue mouldy look about it. And if you've ever seen mould before, you'll have a good idea of what that looks like, and it'll smell even worse than you would normally expect it to smell. And again, you can either just take the layers off and split your scoby, or throw it away and start again. A lot of the time the mould will be on the top where you've maybe not been covering it with tea, and sometimes it just starts. I mean, if you've got a scoby from somebody as a gift, or you've bought one, depending on how clean the hands have been when it's been handled, can cause a bacterial infection, and then, or you can get mould growing, or what looks like mould. And sometimes if you've not been very clean with it yourself, like the worst things that can infect it is if you lick your fingers and you touch things, because there's so much bacteria in your mouth. It's just like an absolute frenzy. And because it's wet and sugary and kind of warm, these are all absolutely amazing breeding grounds for bacteria. So if it goes mouldy, have a look and see how much mould's actually there. And if it's just confined to the top, then take the first couple of layers off your scoby and split it and throw that away. If it's like all the way through, just throw the whole thing away. Disinfect your jar like really well. I usually would put it through the dishwasher, even if it's the only thing in the dishwasher, and that just kills anything that might be there. And then start again from scratch. So hopefully that's been helpful with you with mould. Now, the other thing that sometimes people say to me is that it tastes too sour, and they haven't left it for that long. So if it tastes too sour, it can be one of two things. The most common thing is that you've left it for too long and it started to go into vinegar. So when you're making kombucha, the best thing to do is, when you've had it in a jar for a few days, test it. Just take a little bit out with a clean spoon and just taste it and see what it tastes like. And it'll either still taste like tea, or it'll taste nice, like kind of mild cider, or it'll start to go into the vinegary stage. But if you're testing it after a couple of days and you've got a normal size scoby, it should still taste like tea. And then test it a couple of days later. If it still tastes like tea, it's going to take at least another 2 days before it transforms into a really nice kombucha. And you want to just catch it in that perfect spot for the type of kombucha that you like. For me, I prefer it slightly still on the sweet side, but with a little bit of tang. Some other people prefer it much more like vinegar, so it's all down to personal choice. My recommendation is taste it every couple of days until you get it exactly how you like it. And then you'll know that your scoby takes 5 days or 4 days or 10 days. And then you can just sort of put it in and check it after so many days that you know it's going to be okay. The second thing that could cause this, if you're leaving it for quite a long period of time, is that there's not enough air. So you have to let the top off and put a tea towel around it. It could be that you've not added enough sugar, or it could be that your scoby's actually dead. And sometimes that can happen. And you'll know this because if you take it out and it's quite kind of dried out, it's quite hard, then it's died. And sometimes that can happen. It's not actually ever happened to me, but I have had friends that that's happened to and they've showed me their scoby and it's pretty solid. So a lot of the time that could happen if you've left it where there's not enough liquid to cover it and you haven't like maybe turned it over or anything. I mean, sometimes when I'm pouring the tea into the jar with the scoby, it actually flips round a few times by itself, so I've never had to turn it just because of the force of pressure of the tea going in the jar. But sometimes if that's not happening, then you might want to rotate it manually. And if it's been in the sunlight and it's not got enough coverage, then it will dry out. So throw it away, start again. Their batch doesn't taste as good as the last time. So they'll say to me, oh, I made this amazing batch of kombucha, but the next batch I made didn't taste very good. So sometimes this can happen, especially if you haven't used your scoby for a long time. So I make kombucha very regularly. It's on every week. There's always something in it. The jar very rarely sits without any liquid in it. So I always get really good batches of kombucha. But if you just make it sometimes and then you leave it maybe for a month or a couple of months, then it takes a while to kind of kickstart again. It's almost like if you wake up suddenly in the morning and you get a fright and you're running about, it's like, oh, what's happening? It's kind of like that. If you haven't used it for a while, it just takes a little bit of time to come back into it. And the more you use your scoby, the nicer the kombucha tastes. So because I'm using mine all the time, I get really nice brews all the time. So my suggestion would be, even if you don't drink it, just get in the habit of making it like once every couple of weeks. At least once a month I would put on some kombucha. And if you don't take it, you can just, you know, pour it away, give it to some friends, whatever. But it's really good to just keep your scoby that you're going to use very active. And that way you'll get really nice brews every single time. So the last thing I was going to talk about was sometimes people have said to me, the scoby stinks, right? It smells really bad. And my daughter was actually laughing about this because she thinks it doesn't smell nice anyway, but there's different levels of it. So it has a unique aroma, shall we say. And I mean, I quite like it. It's fine. And the more you use your scoby, the nicer it does begin to smell. But sometimes it can smell really bad. And if that's the case, it could be infected from something, or it could be just starting to grow mould because that tends to not smell very good, or it could be dying. And if that's the case, again, it's just a case of bin it and start again. I would say that if you're making kombucha regularly, a lot of these things don't happen apart from flies in the summertime, and you really have to keep your jar in a quite controlled environment, have it all wrapped up so that they can't get in and they can't do any damage, and then you won't have any problems at all with it. So I hope this has been helpful for you. These are a lot of these things I went through first of all when I started making kombucha. And I'll just finish off by saying, if you've just got your scoby and you're starting to make kombucha, the first couple of brews might not taste quite as good as when you get going with it. Just for what I've said, that sometimes it needs to kind of wake up and start to work properly. So even if you've had it in your scoby hotel, any time that you've not used it for a while and it's been lying around, give it a couple of brews first of all. You don't even need to drink them. Just gives it a little kickstart, and then it's wide awake, ready to start eating and dissolving all that sugar and giving you the most tastiest drink possible, known to creation. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm Kat Muir, Cheap and Easy Eats. See you on the next one. Take care.